It was still early in the morning when Daniel arrived at the tall glass building that touched the sky like it owned the city. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the streets were already alive with people rushing to work. Daniel parked his old silver car near the back entrance, the one the employees never used. The car was old, just like him, but it always started, and that was enough. He pulled out his cleaning bag, locked the door, and took a deep breath before walking inside. For most people, the building was just a place of business, full of important meetings, loud phone calls, and polished shoes. But for Daniel, it was something else. It was the place that paid the bills, kept food on the table, and helped him raise his son. Daniel was a quiet man, the kind of person most people passed by without noticing. He wore simple clothes, a blue uniform with a name tag and worn-out black shoes. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried warmth. There was something about him that made people feel calm, even if they couldn't explain why. Every morning, he started on the 10th floor and worked his way down, cleaning, fixing, and making sure everything looked perfect. The office workers barely noticed him, except maybe when he politely nodded or said good morning. But he didn't mind. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to do his job and get back home to his son, Leo. Leo was 8 years old, full of energy, and the reason Daniel kept going. His wife had passed away a few years earlier in a car accident, leaving Daniel to raise their boy alone. Life hadn't been easy since then. There were long nights when Daniel couldn't sleep, thinking about how to give Leo a better life. But every morning when Leo smiled and hugged him before school, Daniel knew it was worth it. After finishing a floor, Daniel stopped to take a sip of water. His back ached a little, but he never complained. Pain had become a quiet companion in his life, always there, but never loud enough to stop him. On the top floor of the same building, the woman who owned half of the city walked into her office. Her name was Evelyn Hartman, the CEO of Hartman Industries. She was known for her sharp suits, her colder-than-ice stare, and her ability to make decisions that others feared to even talk about. People said she had no time for emotions, only results. Daniel had seen her a few times, walking past him without looking, always surrounded by assistants. She was powerful, confident, and lived in a world completely different from his. But there was one person in her life who softened her heart, her 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. Sophie often came to the office after school when her mother couldn't leave early. She was the opposite of her mother, cheerful, talkative, and curious about everything. Sometimes while her mother was in meetings, Sophie wandered around the building, asking questions, talking to security guards, and even helping Daniel carry his tools. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," she said once, her voice bright as the morning sun. "Do you like your job?" Daniel smiled softly, pausing his work. "It's honest work," he said. "That's all a man can ask for." She tilted her head. "But doesn't it get boring?" Daniel chuckled quietly. "Not really. There's always something to fix, something to clean, and every day I get to make things better, even if it's just a little." Sophie thought about that for a moment, then grinned. "I think that's kind of cool." That was Sophie, seeing goodness where others didn't look. To Daniel, she reminded him of Leo, the way children saw the world with simple kindness. Every time he saw her smile, he thought of his son waiting for him at home. At the end of the day, Daniel would go home, pick up Leo from his neighbor's place, and they'd have dinner together. Simple meals, sometimes just soup and bread. They'd talk about school, about the stars, and sometimes about Daniel's past. But Daniel never told Leo everything. He didn't talk about the years he spent in the army, about the noise of gunfire or the friends he lost. That part of his life was over. He only wanted Leo to see peace. One evening after finishing work, Daniel sat in his car watching the people leaving the building. He saw Evelyn walk out with Sophie beside her. Evelyn was talking on her phone, serious as always, but Sophie waved at Daniel when she saw him. He smiled back, lifting his hand just slightly. It was a small thing, but it warmed his heart. As he drove home through the quiet streets, Daniel thought about how different their lives were. Evelyn had everything: money, power, respect, and yet she always looked tired. Daniel didn't have much, but when he reached home and saw Leo's face light up, it felt like he had the world. Life went on like that for months, quiet, steady, and simple. Daniel worked hard, and Leo grew smarter and happier every day. But behind Daniel's calm life, there was still a part of him that couldn't rest. Sometimes, when he walked through the silent hallways late at night, he'd hear echoes, memories of old missions, orders shouted, people in danger. He'd close his eyes, take a deep breath, and push it all away. That part of his life didn't belong here. One Friday morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. There was a big event happening that day, a business presentation that had the entire company buzzing. Evelyn was preparing to announce a new partnership with an international firm, something that would make headlines. Security was tight, and Daniel had extra work ensuring everything was spotless. As he cleaned the marble floors of the lobby, he overheard two employees talking. "They say the CEO's daughter will be here all evening," one whispered. "Yeah, poor kid. Her mom never takes a break," the other replied. Daniel didn't comment. He understood both sides, the mother working hard for her future and the child who just wanted time with her parent. He continued mopping, thinking about how many times Leo had waited up for him, only to fall asleep on the couch before he got home. By noon, the building was full of guests, reporters, and business partners. Everyone wore suits and expensive smiles. Daniel moved quietly between them, invisible as always, making sure nothing was out of place. He liked it that way, being unnoticed. People who drew too much attention often carried too many problems. Later that evening, after the event ended, most employees went home. The building grew quiet again. Only a few lights stayed on, one in Evelyn's office and another in the security room. Daniel began his usual rounds, checking each floor, humming softly under his breath. On the top floor, Sophie was sitting on the couch outside her mother's office, swinging her legs and reading a book. She looked up when she saw Daniel pass by. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," she said, her voice gentle. "Hello, Miss Sophie," he replied with a small smile. "Still here?" She nodded. "Mom's working late again. She said it's important." Daniel leaned on his mop and smiled kindly. "She's doing it for you, you know, so you can have a better future." Sophie frowned slightly. "I'd rather have her home sometimes." Daniel didn't know what to say. He had thought the same thing about Leo many times, that maybe his son wished he was around more instead of working so hard. But he knew life didn't give people easy choices. "Well," he said softly, "sometimes we do what we have to, even when it's hard. But one day when you're older, you'll understand." Sophie nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "You sound like my grandpa." Daniel chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." He continued cleaning, and Sophie went back to her book. There was something peaceful about those small moments, when life slowed down and everything felt normal. As the clock neared 10, Evelyn finally stepped out of her office. She looked exhausted but relieved. "Sophie, time to go," she said gently. Sophie closed her book and waved goodbye to Daniel. "Good night, Mr. Daniel." "Good night, Miss Sophie," he replied. Evelyn gave Daniel a brief nod, her usual way of saying thank you without words. He nodded back. It was a quiet exchange between two very different worlds. After they left, Daniel finished his work, turned off the lights, and walked outside. The city lights reflected off the wet streets as light rain began to fall. He tilted his head back, letting the raindrops hit his face. For a moment he felt at peace, like everything in his life. No matter how hard still had meaning. He didn't know it yet. But that same peaceful building, the one he had walked through 1,000 times, would soon become the place where his life would change forever. All the quiet mornings, the polite nods, and the unnoticed kindness he'd shown would lead to a single moment that would test everything he was. And in that moment, he wouldn't think about who was rich or poor, powerful or forgotten. He would only think about what was right, and that would make all the difference. The next morning began like any other, calm and ordinary. Daniel woke up before sunrise, just as he always did. His small apartment smelled faintly of coffee and the bread he'd baked the night before. Leo was still asleep, curled up under his blanket with his toy car beside him. Daniel smiled quietly, standing by the doorway for a moment. That sight, his son sleeping peacefully, and gave him strength every single day. He didn't have much in life, but what he had was enough. He brewed a cup of coffee, looked out the window at the slow-moving city, and thought about the long shift ahead. Fridays were always busy, and that day would be no exception. When it was time to leave, he gently woke Leo. "Morning, champ," Daniel said softly. Leo rubbed his eyes and smiled. Morning, Dad. They shared breakfast together, just eggs and toast, but they laughed over small jokes, the kind only fathers and sons understand. Before leaving, Daniel knelt down and fixed Leo's jacket. Remember, listen to your teacher and don't fight with anyone, he said with a grin. Leo laughed. I never fight, Dad. You always tell me to be brave, not angry. Daniel smiled proudly. That's my boy. He dropped Leo at school and headed to work. The city was loud and restless, but Daniel liked the routine. It kept his mind calm. As he reached the tall office building, he saw workers rushing inside, coffee cups in hand, faces buried in phones. No one noticed the man walking quietly through the back entrance, but that didn't bother him. He didn't need to be seen to make a difference. Inside, the building buzzed with energy. There was talk about the CEO's big announcement later that evening, a partnership deal worth millions. The entire staff was excited, nervous even. Everything had to be perfect. Daniel had cleaned the same marble floors 100 times, but that morning he polished them twice. He wanted them to shine like glass. By afternoon, the building was filled with guests and reporters. Daniel kept to the corners, checking lights, adjusting chairs, and clearing the smallest smudge off the walls. He didn't speak much, but people felt safer when he was around. There was something about his quiet presence that made everything seem under control. When evening came, the event began. From a distance, Daniel could see Evelyn standing on stage, speaking to the crowd with confidence. Her daughter Sophie sat near the front row, clapping proudly for her mother. Daniel smiled at the sight. Despite their different worlds, he respected Evelyn. She worked hard, and it was clear she loved her daughter deeply, even if she didn't always show it. After the speeches and handshakes, the crowd slowly thinned out. By 9 o'clock, the building was quiet again. Most of the lights were off except for a few in the upper floors. Daniel stayed behind to clean the lobby, sweeping and mopping in slow, steady motions. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was coming. Upstairs, Evelyn was finishing some last-minute calls. Sophie sat on the sofa, drawing in her sketchbook, humming softly. The rain began to fall harder, tapping against the windows like soft fingers. Daniel was about to take a short break when he heard something strange, a loud bang near the entrance. It wasn't thunder this time. It was sharper. He froze, his instincts kicking in before his mind could even process what it was. Years in the army had taught him the sound of danger. A man had forced his way into the lobby. His face was half covered by a mask, his hands shaking as he held something that made Daniel's heart drop. A gun. The man shouted, his voice echoing across the empty hall. Where's Evelyn Hartman? Tell her to come down right now. Daniel didn't move. He stayed behind a column, his mind racing. The security guard at the main desk had already called for help, but it would take time for anyone to arrive. The man was furious, pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. Daniel took a deep breath and slowly stepped out where the man could see him. Sir, he said calmly, his voice low and steady. You need to put that down. Let's talk. The man turned sharply, pointing the gun toward him. Stay back. You don't understand. She ruined my life. I want her to see what she's done. Daniel's eyes softened. I understand you're angry, but this isn't the way. You don't want to do something you can't take back. The man's hands trembled. She took everything from me. My job, my house. I have nothing left. Daniel slowly stepped closer, keeping his hands open, visible. I've lost things too, he said quietly. I know what it feels like. But hurting people won't fix it. Please just let me help. Upstairs, Evelyn heard the shouting. She froze for a second, then rushed to the elevator, but Sophie ran after her. Mom, what's happening? Evelyn's face turned pale. Stay here, sweetheart, she said quickly. I'll handle it. But Sophie shook her head and followed anyway. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and as soon as they stepped out, the man saw Evelyn. His eyes filled with rage. There you are, he yelled, raising the gun. Evelyn gasped and pulled Sophie behind her. Everything happened so fast after that. The shouting, the fear, the split-second decision that would change everything. The man aimed. Sophie screamed. And without thinking, Daniel moved. He didn't hesitate. He ran forward, placing himself between Sophie and the gun. There was a loud crack and a sound that froze time itself. Daniel felt a burning pain in his shoulder. Then his legs gave out beneath him. Evelyn screamed his name, though she hadn't even realized she knew it. The gun clattered to the floor as security guards rushed in. They tackled the man, pinning him down. The sound of shouting and panic filled the air, but Daniel barely heard any of it. His vision blurred as he lay on the cold marble floor. Sophie was crying beside him, holding his hand. "Please, Mr. Daniel, don't close your eyes," she sobbed. "Please." Daniel forced a small smile through the pain. "It's okay. You're safe," he whispered. His voice was weak but calm, like he was trying to comfort her, not himself. Evelyn knelt beside them, her face pale, tears falling freely. "Stay with us," she said, pressing her hands against his wound. "Help is coming. Just hold on." Daniel's breathing grew shallow, but he nodded faintly. "Don't let her see me like this," he said softly, glancing at Sophie. But Sophie refused to move. She gripped his hand tighter. "You saved me," she cried. Daniel looked at her, and for a brief moment he saw his own son's face. That same innocence, that same trust. He felt warmth spread through him, not from the pain, but from something deeper. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They lifted Daniel carefully onto a stretcher, covering the wound and giving him oxygen. As they rolled him toward the ambulance, Sophie ran beside them, refusing to let go of his hand until they reached the door. Evelyn stood frozen in the rain, watching the flashing red lights disappear into the distance. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. The man who had saved her daughter, a man she had barely spoken to, had just risked his life without a second thought. The police took the attacker away. The building was surrounded by reporters by the time Evelyn and Sophie were escorted outside. Questions were shouted, cameras flashed, but Evelyn said nothing. She held Sophie close, her mind still spinning from the shock. That night felt endless. Evelyn sat in the hospital waiting room, still in her business suit, her hair soaked from the rain. Sophie was asleep on her lap, holding onto Daniel's old work cap that one of the paramedics had picked up from the floor. Every minute felt like an hour as she waited for news. Finally, a doctor approached. His face was serious but gentle. "He's alive," he said. The bullet missed his heart, but it caused heavy bleeding. "He's stable now. He'll need time to recover." Evelyn closed her eyes in relief. "Thank God," she whispered. The doctor nodded. "He's very lucky. Another inch and it could have been fatal." She wanted to thank him, to tell him how grateful she was, but the words wouldn't come out. She looked down at Sophie, sleeping peacefully, and felt tears burn her eyes again. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about business, deals, or money. She was thinking about life and the man who had just saved it. Later that night, she was allowed to see Daniel. He lay in a hospital bed, pale but breathing steadily. His shoulder was bandaged and there were tubes beside him, but his face looked calm, almost peaceful. Evelyn stood there quietly for a long moment. She didn't know what to say. She thought about how many times she had walked past him in the hallways, never once thinking about who he was beyond his uniform. And yet, this same man had stepped in front of her child without hesitation. Sophie slipped into the room and held Daniel's hand gently. "You're my hero," she whispered. A faint smile appeared on Daniel's lips. His eyes opened slightly. "Hey there," he murmured. "You okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Because of you." Daniel looked over at Evelyn, his voice quiet. "She's brave," he said. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tight. "She learned that from you tonight." Daniel tried to sit up, but the pain stopped him. The doctor quickly stepped in, telling him to rest. Evelyn stayed by his side, not leaving even when the nurses suggested she go home. She just sat there, watching the man who had saved her daughter's life, a man she had once thought was invisible. As dawn broke outside, the first rays of light filled the hospital room. Daniel was asleep again, breathing softly. Evelyn looked at him and whispered to herself, "I'll make sure you're never forgotten." She didn't know yet what that promise would mean. But that night changed something deep inside her. For the first time, she saw the world through someone else's eyes, through kindness, sacrifice, and quiet strength, and she knew, from that moment on, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Daniel woke up to the soft sound of machines beeping beside him. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh flowers. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the morning light coming through the blinds. Then it came back to him. The shouting, the gun, Sophie's terrified face, and the pain in his shoulder. He turned his head slightly, feeling a dull ache run down his arm. A white bandage covered the wound. He wasn't in the office anymore. He was in a hospital bed, alive, but barely. The door opened quietly and a nurse stepped in. She smiled when she saw him awake. "Good morning," she said softly. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The nurse poured a glass of water and helped him sit up. "You're lucky," she said. "The bullet missed the major arteries. You'll recover, but you'll need rest." He nodded weakly. How long have I been here?" "Almost 2 days," she replied. "You lost a lot of blood, but you're stable now." Daniel leaned back, letting her words sink in. 2 days, and that meant Leo had been alone, probably scared. He tried to get up, but the nurse stopped him gently. "You can't move yet. The doctor will come soon. Just rest." He nodded again, closing his eyes. Moments later, there was a quiet knock on the door. The nurse smiled and stepped aside as 2 familiar figures entered, Evelyn and Sophie. Evelyn looked different from how Daniel remembered her. She wasn't wearing her sharp suit or her usual confident expression. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and she held a small bouquet of white flowers in her hands. Sophie walked beside her, holding a handmade card. When Daniel saw them, he tried to smile. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. Evelyn shook her head. "We had to," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "You saved my daughter's life. The least we can do is thank you in person." Sophie hurried to his bedside and placed the card on the table next to him. "I made this for you," she said shyly. Daniel looked at it. A child's drawing of him standing like a hero, with Sophie smiling beside him. At the top, in colorful letters, it said, "Thank you, Mr. Daniel." He felt his chest tighten, not from pain, but from emotion. "That's the best card I've ever seen," he said with a faint laugh. Sophie smiled wide, her eyes full of relief. "Mom said you're very brave. I told everyone at school what you did." Evelyn placed the flowers beside the card and sat down quietly. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't even know how to begin," she said softly. "You risked your life for my daughter. I've replayed that night 1,000 times and I still can't understand why you did it." Daniel looked at her, his voice calm. "Because it was the right thing to do." Evelyn looked down, her eyes glistening. "You didn't even know us." Daniel sighed lightly. "I didn't need to," he said. "A child was in danger, I just acted." There was silence in the room for a few moments. Evelyn nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "You could have died," she whispered. Daniel gave a small smile. "I've been through worse," he said quietly. That made her pause. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked away for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Before I worked at the building, I served in the army," he said softly. "A long time ago, I saw things that change a person. I learned that life can be taken away in a second, so if I can save someone else, I will every time." Evelyn listened quietly. For the first time, she saw him not as a janitor, but as a man who carried a lifetime of courage behind his quiet smile. Sophie reached out and held his hand. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Only a little. But seeing you safe makes it better." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Daniel, I want to do something for you," she said. "For what you've done for us. I can't let this go unanswered." Daniel shook his head lightly. "You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad your daughter's okay." But Evelyn didn't accept that. "No," she said firmly. "You deserve more than a thank you. When you're well enough, I'll make sure you have a new position. Better pay, better hours, whatever you want." Daniel's voice was kind but firm. "I appreciate that, truly. But I'm fine where I am." Evelyn frowned slightly. "You'd rather go back to cleaning floors after what you've done?" He smiled faintly. "It's honest work. It lets me go home to my son every night. That's all I need." That was the first time Evelyn had heard him mention a son. "You have a child?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "His name's Leo. He's 8. Smart kid. He's probably been worried sick." Evelyn's eyes softened even more. "I'll make sure he's taken care of while you recover," she said immediately. "Whatever he needs. Food, clothes, school supplies, and it's done." Daniel looked at her, surprised. "That's kind of you, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Evelyn said quietly. "It's gratitude." He wanted to argue, but her tone told him not to. So instead, he just nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. After a while, Sophie began to get sleepy. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Evelyn stood up. "We'll let you rest," she said. But we'll come back tomorrow. Daniel smiled warmly. You don't have to. We want to, Sophie said, her voice already soft from sleepiness. When they left, Daniel lay back against his pillow, looking at the ceiling. He thought about how strange life could be. One moment he was invisible, just a janitor no one noticed. The next he was lying in a hospital bed being called a hero by the people he used to quietly clean up after. But deep down, he didn't feel like a hero. He just felt human. That night, as the room grew quiet, Daniel drifted in and out of sleep. In his dreams, he saw his wife's face, gentle, smiling, proud. You did good, she whispered. Keep going. The next few days passed slowly. Daniel's strength returned little by little. Nurses checked on him often, and the doctors said he was healing faster than expected. Evelyn and Sophie visited daily, bringing small gifts, books, fresh fruit, flowers. Each time they came, Sophie would sit by his bed, chatting about school, about her friends, about how the news had called him the brave janitor. Daniel would laugh softly. I don't feel brave, he said once. You are, Sophie insisted. You're my hero. Evelyn often stood by the window during these visits, watching them talk. Every time she looked at Daniel, she felt something change inside her. A quiet realization that not all strength came from power or money. Some came from heart. One afternoon, she came alone. Daniel was sitting up reading an old magazine. He looked up and smiled. No Sophie today? She's at school, Evelyn said, pulling up a chair. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. I wanted to tell you something, he nodded. Go ahead. I looked into your background, she said carefully. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to understand who you really are. Daniel raised an eyebrow, amused. And what did you find? She took a slow breath. You served for 10 years. You were awarded medals for bravery. You saved lives long before you ever worked for me. And yet when you came back, you took a janitor's job just to raise your son. Daniel looked away, slightly embarrassed. War doesn't make people heroes, he said softly. It just reminds them how precious life is. Evelyn nodded slowly. Maybe, but it takes someone special to live that lesson every day. Daniel didn't answer. The compliment made him uncomfortable, but deep down he appreciated it. After a pause, Evelyn continued, her voice more personal now. You know, I used to think people like you and me lived in different worlds, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're the kind of person this company and this world needs more of. Daniel chuckled quietly. That's kind of you to say. She smiled faintly. It's not kindness. It's truth. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Later that evening, after Evelyn left, Leo finally came to visit with a neighbor. When Daniel saw his son walk through the door, his eyes filled with tears. Leo ran straight into his father's arms. Dad, I was so scared. Daniel hugged him tight, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. I'm okay, buddy. I'm okay. Leo looked up, his small eyes full of worry. Everyone at school said you're a hero. Did you really save someone? Daniel smiled softly. I just helped someone who needed it. That's all, Leo nodded seriously. Then I want to be like you when I grow up. Those words made Daniel's heart swell. He couldn't ask for anything more. When the nurse came in to check on him, Leo refused to let go of his hand. They spent the night talking, laughing quietly, and planning what they'd do once Daniel was home again. Maybe a small trip, maybe just a walk by the river, something simple, something peaceful. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance, and Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He didn't know what would come next. Maybe he'd go back to work, maybe his life would stay simple. But one thing was certain. The bond between him, Evelyn, and Sophie had changed forever. He had saved a life that night, but in return, they had reminded him that his own life still had meaning. And as he held his son's hand, Daniel silently promised himself that no matter what came next, he'd face it with the same courage that had carried him through everything so far. His turned into weeks, and Daniel slowly regained his strength. The pain in his shoulder had eased, though it reminded him constantly of that night, the night he had stepped in to protect Sophie, the night that changed everything. He spent most of his days in quiet recovery, thinking about life, his son, and the unexpected connections he had made. The hospital had become a temporary home in a way. Nurses knew him by name. Sophie and Evelyn visited almost daily, and even the cleaning staff from the hospital had begun recognizing him. Yet through all of this, Daniel never lost his humility. He didn't see himself as special. He only knew he had done what anyone else would have done if given the chance. Evelyn, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about him. She had always been someone who measured life in results, deals, and power. But Daniel had shown her something no amount of money could buy: pure courage and kindness. Every day she came to visit, she noticed the quiet dignity in him, the way he smiled despite pain, the gentle way he treated Sophie, and the unspoken love he had for his son. One afternoon, after Daniel had made progress and could sit up in bed, Evelyn brought something new with her in a folder. She placed it carefully on the table beside him. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "I want to offer you something. Not because I have to, but because you deserve it." Daniel looked at the folder, unsure what it could be. "I'm not sure I understand," he said, his voice cautious but curious. "It's a job offer," she said. "A position here at Hartman Industries. You don't have to take it if you don't want to. I just want you to consider it." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A job? You mean not janitor?" She shook her head. "No, something more than that. Something safer. Something that recognizes what you've done and what you can do. I've created a new role, head of building safety. You'd oversee the security and safety of this entire building. It's not easy, but I know you can do it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He had spent years avoiding positions of authority, preferring simple work and a simple life. But Evelyn wasn't offering him power. She was offering him respect and responsibility. It was a difficult choice. I don't know what to say," he said finally. "I'm not used to this." "Then don't say anything yet," Evelyn replied. "Just think about it, and know that whatever you decide, you'll always have my gratitude, and Sophie's." That evening, as Daniel lay back on his bed, he thought about Leo. The job would mean more responsibility, more time away from home, but it would also give him stability, benefits, and a better future for his son. And the truth was, he had always wanted more than just survival for Leo. He wanted opportunity. He wanted safety. After a few days, Daniel made his decision. He accepted the offer, not for glory, not for recognition, but for the life it would provide his son. He wanted to be able to give Leo more than he could as a janitor, and now he could. When he returned to work, the building felt different. The floors he had once cleaned quietly now seemed to welcome him in a new way. People greeted him with respect, not just politeness. Some of them still didn't know his full story, but that didn't matter. Daniel had earned their trust in a way that couldn't be ignored. The first week in his new role was challenging. There were security protocols to learn, meetings with staff, and planning exercises he hadn't experienced since his time in the Army. But he adapted quickly. His past experience helped him anticipate risks, read people, and understand how to keep everyone safe. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt meaningful. Sophie often visited him during breaks, bringing small gifts or just sitting quietly by his office window. She loved hearing him talk about security measures in simple ways, as though explaining a game. She admired the fact that he had saved her life and now had an important job. To her, he was more than a hero. He was family. Evelyn noticed the change too. She had seen many employees come and go, but Daniel was different. He wasn't motivated by money, recognition, or status. He was motivated by something far rarer: care. And that care had a ripple effect. The staff began to feel safer, more connected, and more willing to follow procedures because of him. One afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected visitor, a man who introduced himself as a teacher from Leo's school. He had come to thank Daniel personally. "Your son has been talking about you nonstop," the teacher said with a warm smile. "He says you're the bravest man he knows." Daniel smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. "Tell him." "Thank you. And tell him I love him very much." The teacher nodded. "I will. He's lucky to have you." That night, Daniel and Leo sat together at home, talking quietly. Leo's schoolwork lay scattered on the table, and his small hands fidgeted with a pencil. "Dad, you really are brave, aren't you?" Leo asked softly. Daniel chuckled quietly. "I guess I've done a few brave things. But being brave doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it just means doing what's right even when it's hard." Leo nodded as though understanding something profound. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "Then you will be, buddy. Just keep being kind and honest, and the rest will follow." Meanwhile, the building continued to function smoothly under Daniel's guidance. Fire drills, safety inspections, and emergency protocols were now organized with precision. Employees began to see him not just as the man who once cleaned the floors, but as someone who could keep them safe. Some even came to him for advice, trusting his judgment more than anyone else's. Evelyn observed quietly from her office. She had learned a valuable lesson. True leadership didn't always come from the person with the highest title. Sometimes it came from the person with the most courage and the most heart, and Daniel had both in abundance. One day she called him to her office. "Daniel," she said, her tone thoughtful, "I want to apologize." "For what?" he asked, surprised. "For not noticing you before, for walking past you, treating you like just another employee. You saved my daughter's life, and yet I didn't see the kind of man you really are until it was almost too late." Daniel shook his head. "It's all right. I don't need apologies. I only did what I had to do." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Still, I owe you more than that. You've shown me a lot about courage and humility. I won't forget it." Daniel nodded quietly. "Thank you," he said simply. Weeks later, Sophie invited him to attend a small school event. He hesitated at first, not sure if it was appropriate for someone in his new position, but Sophie's pleading eyes won. "Please, Mr. Daniel, you saved me. I want you there." When he arrived, Daniel found himself surrounded by children, teachers, and parents. He felt out of place at first, but as Sophie ran up to him and waved proudly, he realized it didn't matter. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to be part of her world, even if only for a few hours. Watching Sophie perform on stage, Daniel felt a sense of pride and joy he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him why he did what he did, why he worked hard, why he protected, why he lived every day with care and attention. These small moments, these human connections were worth more than any medal, any money, any recognition. By the end of the event, Evelyn approached him quietly. "You should be proud," she said softly. "You've done more than you realize." Daniel smiled gently. "I'm proud of her," he said, nodding toward Sophie. Evelyn paused, studying him. "You've changed this place," she admitted. "Not just with your work, but with your heart. People notice. People respect you, and I think it's made everyone a little better." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't do what he did for recognition, but hearing those words warmed him. "I just do my part," he said finally. "That's all any of us can do." As the weeks passed, Daniel settled into a rhythm. Work was meaningful, home was peaceful, and he was slowly learning to trust that good things could happen even in a world that often seemed harsh. Evelyn and Sophie remained close, visiting often and slowly. A bond of mutual respect and genuine care grew between them. Through it all, Daniel never forgot why he had risked his life that night. It wasn't for fame, money, or power. It was for what was right. And as he held Leo's hand each evening, watched Sophie laugh during school events, and guided the safety of the building he worked in, he realized something important. Courage and kindness were not just about one heroic moment. They were about every small choice you made. Every day, Daniel had saved a life, but in the process, he had found something even more precious. A purpose, a family that wasn't bound by blood, and a reminder that life could be beautiful, even in the smallest, quietest ways. Months had passed since that night in the lobby, and life had slowly begun to feel normal again for Daniel. The pain from his shoulder had faded, replaced with a faint scar, a small reminder of the moment that had changed everything. He had settled into his new role as head of building safety, and though it carried responsibility, he felt at peace with it. His days were filled with meaningful work, keeping everyone safe and knowing that he had made a difference. Leo had grown used to seeing his father at work, and the boy's admiration for him had only deepened. Daniel loved hearing about Leo's day at school, helping him with homework and teaching him simple lessons about life, honesty, and kindness. Every evening they would sit by the window in their small apartment, watching the city lights flicker across the streets, and Daniel would feel a quiet sense of fulfillment he had never known before. Sophie and Evelyn were still frequent visitors, and their bond with Daniel had grown stronger. Sophie loved to share her stories from school, show Daniel her drawings, and sometimes even help him review building safety protocols in her own imaginative way. Evelyn had begun to rely on Daniel not just for safety, but also for guidance, seeing in him a moral compass and a friend she could trust. One morning, Daniel arrived at work to find a small crowd gathered in the lobby. Curiosity piqued, he moved closer and saw that it was Evelyn standing at the front, speaking quietly but with a gentle authority. She noticed him and smiled, waving him forward. "I wanted to do something for you," she said, her voice steady but warm. Daniel approached cautiously. "I'm sure you don't have to," he said. "No, this is important," Evelyn replied. She gestured to a large framed certificate and a small plaque beside it. "We've decided to recognize you officially. This is for bravery and for your service here at Hartman Industries. It's not just for saving Sophie, but for everything you do to keep this building and everyone in it safe." Daniel felt his heart tighten. He had never sought recognition, yet seeing Evelyn, Sophie, and even some of the staff gathered to honor him, he felt a profound sense of connection. He stepped forward and accepted the certificate carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Sophie ran up and hugged him tightly. "You're my hero forever," she whispered. Daniel laughed softly, feeling the warmth of the moment. "Thank you, Sophie," he said, ruffling her hair gently. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Employees shook his hand, thanked him, and smiled in ways that showed genuine appreciation. Daniel, who had once been invisible in the building, realized that his actions had created a ripple effect, a quiet change in people's hearts, a sense of safety and respect that couldn't be measured in money or status. After the event, Daniel returned to his office, placing the plaque on his desk. He looked out the window at the bustling city below, thinking about how unpredictable life could be. One moment he had been a simple janitor, walking through life quietly. The next he had risked everything for a child he barely knew, and in doing so, had transformed not only his life but the lives of those around him. That afternoon, Evelyn approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Daniel," she said, "I want to ask you something." He looked up, curious. "Of course. I know you've accepted the role here, but I wonder, would you consider helping us expand safety training across all our offices? You'd train staff in different cities, share your expertise, and help us create safer workplaces everywhere." Daniel paused. He had never thought of himself as a teacher or a leader in that way. But then he thought about Leo, about Sophie, and about all the people he had helped without expecting anything in return. He nodded slowly. "I'll do it," he said finally. "If it helps keep people safe, I'll do it." Evelyn smiled, relief and admiration in her eyes. "I knew you'd say that," she said softly. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel traveled occasionally to different offices, sharing his knowledge and experience. Employees listened attentively, inspired not just by his expertise but by the quiet authority of his character. Daniel didn't seek applause or attention. He simply focused on teaching, guiding, and protecting. Meanwhile, his relationship with Sophie and Evelyn continued to grow. They became like family to him, filling a space in his life that had been lonely since Leo's mother had passed away. There were birthdays, small celebrations, and quiet dinners together, moments of laughter and connection that reminded Daniel of the simple joys he had once feared were gone forever. One evening, after a long day of training, Daniel returned home to find Leo waiting at the door, holding a small trophy from school. "Look, Dad," Leo exclaimed. "I won first place in the science fair." Daniel knelt down, his heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing, buddy. I'm so proud of you," Leo grinned. "I wanted to show you first because you always tell me to try my best." Daniel hugged him tightly. "And you did. You never give up. That's what makes you strong." As he settled Leo into bed that night, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him here. Life had tested him in ways he had never imagined. Loss, danger, uncertainty. But it had also given him a chance to make a real difference. And in doing so, he had discovered a deeper sense of purpose, one that went beyond survival, money, or recognition. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the building to find an unusual calm in the lobby. He noticed a few employees whispering and smiling at him, but before he could ask, Evelyn approached. "Daniel," she said, her voice bright. "I wanted to tell you something exciting." He raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "We're launching a new community outreach program," she explained. "We want to help local schools with safety programs, emergency training, and mentorship. And I want you to lead it." Daniel considered it carefully. He had never sought recognition outside the building, but this felt right. "I'd be honored," he said finally. Over the next few months, Daniel became a familiar figure in local schools. He taught children simple safety measures, helped staff plan drills, and shared lessons about courage, kindness, and responsibility. His story, the night he had risked his life for Sophie, became an inspiration, not because of the drama, but because of the quiet humanity behind it. Through it all, Daniel never lost sight of what mattered most: Leo. He made sure that every opportunity, every program, and every responsibility he took on allowed him to be present for his son. They continued their nightly talks, their small adventures, and their shared dreams. Daniel taught Leo that heroism wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about the choices you made, the people you protected, and the lives you touched. Sophie remained a constant in their lives as well. She often joined Daniel and Leo for small outings, visits to the park, ice cream after school, or simple walks through the city streets. The three of them shared a bond built on trust, gratitude, and the memory of that night when Daniel had stepped between danger and her. Evelyn, too, found a new respect for life. She had learned from Daniel that true strength wasn't about power or wealth, but about courage, humility, and compassion. She often confided in him about challenges at work, and he offered quiet guidance, helping her balance ambition with humanity. One sunny afternoon, Daniel stood by the window of the building, watching children play in a nearby park. Leo and Sophie were laughing together, their small voices carrying across the distance. He felt a deep sense of peace knowing that life, with all its trials and dangers, had led to this moment, one of connection, safety, and genuine happiness. It was a far cry from the fear and chaos of that night months ago, yet Daniel knew that the courage he had shown then had shaped everything that came after. The decision to act, to protect, and to care had created a chain of events that would impact not just one family but countless lives. As evening fell, Daniel returned home, tired but content. He found Leo waiting for him, holding a small notebook. "Look, Dad," Leo said, "I wrote a story about a hero who saves someone and changes their life forever. I used you as inspiration." Daniel smiled softly, kneeling beside his son. "That's wonderful, Leo," he said. "But remember, the real hero is the one who keeps trying even when it's hard. That's you every day." Leo grinned, hugging him tightly. "I want to be brave like you." Daniel held him close, feeling a warmth he had never known in the years of struggle and uncertainty. Life had given him a second chance, a life filled with purpose, love, and connection. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had discovered the value of his own. And as he looked out the window at the city lights twinkling like distant stars, Daniel knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, he would face them with courage, compassion, and the quiet strength that had always defined him. He had learned that heroism wasn't about being seen or celebrated. It was about the choices you made, the people you protected, and the lives you touched. And in that understanding, Daniel found not just fulfillment, but a deep, unshakable peace, a knowledge that life, in all its unpredictability, had given him exactly what he needed. For Daniel, the single father who had once walked quietly through the halls of a skyscraper, life had come full circle. He had risked everything for another child, and in return, he had gained something far greater: family, respect, purpose, and the quiet joy of knowing that he had made a difference. And that was more than any hero could ask for.